The world at 5:45 a.m. was mine. It was a world painted in shades of blue and gray, hushed and holding its breath before the sun. The air was cool and carried the sweet, damp smell of dew on fresh-cut grass, a scent I cherished far more than the sterile, recycled air of my home office. This was my sanctuary. As a software engineer whose brain was usually a tangled knot of code and deadlines, this pre-dawn hour was my meditation. The silence was a physical presence, broken only by the distant chirp of a waking bird or the soft crunch of my own footsteps on the driveway. This ritual was my secret weapon for sanity. In the quiet, I could untangle complex algorithms, the rhythmic, mindless nature of the task freeing my subconscious to work. I'd chosen the 6 a.m. start time with meticulous care, a small act of rebellion that felt both justified and harmless. The city's noise ordinance was clear, 7 a.m. I was technically a rule breaker, but a quiet, considerate one. My Toro mower was a modern, well-oiled machine, its engine a subdued hum that, to my ears, was less intrusive than the rumble of the first commuter's car. I saw myself as a ghost, tidying my little plot of earth before the world awoke, leaving behind only the clean, sharp lines in the grass and that beautiful, earthy perfume as my trace. It felt like a perfect, victimless crime. I had no idea my peaceful rebellion had an audience, one who viewed my quiet hum as a declaration of war. The crimson fury materialized not with a shout, but with a silent, seething presence that cut through my zen-like focus. I was on my third pass, lost in the satisfying geometry of straight lines, when I saw her, a flash of fiery red bathrobe, moving with the jerky, predatory purpose of a startled flamingo. Mrs. Agatha Gable stood 2 houses down, a woman whose face seemed permanently sculpted into a frown of profound personal disappointment. She was the HOA's unofficial chief enforcer, a volunteer position she treated with the grave solemnity of a Supreme Court justice. She didn't wave. She didn't call out a neighborly, if sleepy, greeting. She stood rigidly on her immaculate, white-painted porch, her phone a stark white rectangle against her ear. One bony finger, pale and accusatory, was thrust directly at me and my transgressing mower. The morning's peace curdled in an instant, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I considered cutting the engine, but a stubborn pride kept me going. Stopping would feel like an admission of guilt. So I mowed on, the hum of the motor now sounding deafening in the tense silence, each second stretching out as I waited for the other shoe to drop. It dropped with the silent, spinning flash of blue and red lights, painting my serene, dewy world with the official colors of reprimand. The officer, a young man with tired eyes, was polite, almost apologetic as he approached. "Got a call about excessive noise, sir. A bit early for that, isn't it?" he said, his voice a low rumble. I explained the 7 a.m. ordinance, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded, agreeing I was technically in the clear, but then he offered the advice that sealed my defeat. "Maybe just wait till 7? He suggested, his tone that of a man who'd mediated 100 such petty wars. "Keep the peace." I looked past him to Mrs. Gable's house. Her curtain twitched shut, the final act of a victorious general. The peace had just been declared, and I had lost. The humiliation didn't just burn. It festered. It followed me inside, a bitter taste in the back of my throat that my morning coffee couldn't wash away. For the rest of the day, the quiet of my house felt oppressive, a testament to my defeat. I replayed the scene on a loop. The flashing lights, the officer's patronizing advice, the triumphant twitch of that curtain. I had been so focused on the letter of the law, I'd forgotten the unwritten rule of suburban warfare. Petty tyranny often trumps technicality. That evening, the anger had cooled into a hard, sharp resolve. I was taking my recycling bin to the curb, the plastic wheels making a dull, rumbling sound on the pavement, when the revelation struck. It was Thursday. Trash day was Friday. And like a biblical plague, the garbage trucks would arrive at 6:30 a.m. with a symphony of crashing bins, beeping backups, the gnashing teeth of the compactor, and the roar of a diesel engine that could wake the dead. It was a cacophony the entire street slept through or, more likely, accepted as a necessary public nuisance. A legally sanctioned, municipally mandated alarm clock. And that was it. The seed, beautiful and petty, took root. Mrs. Gable didn't just dislike noise. She disliked noise she couldn't control. My lawnmower was an independent variable in her controlled universe. But the trash trucks? They were a force of nature beyond her reach. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. She loved rules. She worshipped order. Very well. I would give her a masterclass in both. I would use the system's own noise, its own schedule, to make my point. The war was no longer about mowing my lawn. It was about proving a point, with the glorious, clattering percussion of my own trash bins as my weapon of choice. My anger cooled and hardened into a sharp, focused resolve. This would not be a war of emotion, but of procedure. I became a scholar of the mundane, a connoisseur of covenants. While Mrs. Gable wielded her authority like a cudgel, I would arm myself with the dry, unassailable power of the bylaws. My nights were no longer for decompressing. They were for research. I brewed pots of coffee and dove into the digital depths of the HOA's governing documents and the city's municipal code. I was not looking for loopholes, but for absences. And I found glorious, beautiful voids. There was no rule, no clause, no footnote that governed what time one could roll their bins to the curb. The act itself was completely unregulated. Similarly, there were no specifications on the type of wheels a bin could have. The phrase robust wheels appeared nowhere. And crucially, there was no prohibition against a diligent homeowner adjusting their bin's position the evening before pickup. I was operating in a vast, legal wilderness. My tools were simple, almost poetic in their normality. My standard-issue wheeled bins. My battlefield was my own driveway. But every weapon can be upgraded. A trip to the hardware store yielded my ammunition. 2 sets of heavy-duty, all-terrain replacement wheels. They were not designed for quiet efficiency. They were made of a harder, more brittle polymer, and the axle housing was slightly imperfect. I installed them with the care of a bomb maker, a smear of grease on my cheek. When I gave the bin an experimental push, it was perfect. The gentle rumble was gone, replaced by a magnificent, jarring clack 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 that echoed like gunfire in my quiet garage. The trap was set, and the bait was impeccably legal. The following Thursday night, the air itself felt charged with a silent, electric anticipation. 10 p.m. arrived, the street submerged in the deep, respectable quiet of a sleeping suburb. My heart was no longer thumping with anxiety, but beating a steady, purposeful rhythm of delicious, calculated retaliation. I moved with the deliberate silence of a commando, opening the garage door by hand, inch by painful inch, to avoid the betraying groan of its motor. The cold plastic of the bin handle felt like the hilt of a sword. I took a breath, not of hesitation, but of focus, and began the march to the curb. The new wheels, my beautiful, imperfect weapons, did not disappoint. On the smooth asphalt of the driveway, they created a percussive, staccato clack-clack-clack that seemed to shred the silence. Each rotation was a hammer strike on the anvil of the night, a sound so obnoxiously loud it felt like it must be waking the entire county. I moved slowly, maximizing the acoustic torture, my path a straight, defiant line to the curb. I positioned the bins with geometric precision, parallel to the street, and ended the performance with a final, satisfying thud as I set them down. I stood there for a moment in the ringing silence that followed, my ears straining. And then I heard it. From 2 houses down, a sharp, clean crack, the sound of a window being slammed shut with violent force. It was the sound of victory. A slow, deep smile spread across my face, unseen in the darkness. Operation Trash Day alarm clock was officially underway. The following Thursday, I escalated. At 10 p.m. sharp, the inaugural clack-clack-clack echoed through the night. I took my time, savoring the jarring percussion. Then, I went back inside, waited 15 minutes, and brought the bins back in with another glorious, rackety parade. The sound of the wheels retracing their path felt like a deliberate, mocking encore. Just before I went to bed at 11:30, I rolled them out one final time, a late-night serenade to ensure the point was hammered home. The HOA's response was swift. A new, more sternly worded letter arrived, this time threatening a fine for creating a persistent and deliberate nuisance. I could almost smell the frustration wafting from the formal parchment. This was exactly what I wanted. I crafted my response with the precision of a lawyer drafting a Supreme Court brief. I did not deny the noise. Instead, I asked the board to formally define nuisance in the context of legally compliant waste disposal activities. I attached decibel level charts comparing my bin wheels to a standard lawnmower. And in my closing paragraph, I delivered the masterstroke. I kindly reminded them that a noise complaint regarding an activity at a lower decibel level than municipal trash collection had previously been deemed worthy of a 911 response. The implication was clear. If my bins were a nuisance, then her call was an absurd overreaction. If her call was valid, then my bins were protected speech. My appeal was once again granted. The fine was rescinded. The battlefield was tilting. The war of attrition stretched into a month, and the entire street became a silent audience to our conflict. My 10 p.m. bin roll became a neighborhood event. Mr. Henderson across the street, who'd once been cited for his mailbox being the wrong shade of eggshell, began to coincidentally be checking his own, perfectly compliant bins at the same time, offering me a subtle, conspiratorial smirk. Another neighbor gave a faint, encouraging nod from their darkened window. I was no longer just a nuisance. I was a symbol of quiet resistance. The breaking point came on the fourth Thursday. I was mid-clack, the sound particularly sharp in the cool autumn air, when I saw Mrs. Gable's front door open. She didn't march, but rather trudged down her walkway. She wasn't in her fiery red robe, but in a dull beige cardigan, and she looked smaller, older, stripped of her official armor by the sheer, grinding pettiness of it all. She stopped at the end of her driveway, the harsh porch light carving deep shadows into her face. "Please," she said, her voice thin and frayed, carrying none of its former command. It was just a tired whisper in the night. "The bins. Please. It's enough." I stopped, my hand still on the cold plastic handle. The silence that rushed in was profound. I looked at her, this woman who had wielded rules like a weapon, now broken by them. "My lawnmower is very quiet, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice calm and even. "I like to mow at 6 a.m. It's peaceful." She swallowed, her gaze dropping to her own perfectly manicured hedge, a monument to the order she craved. She looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw not an adversary, but just a tired old woman. "Your lawn," she began, her voice barely audible. "It looks lovely at any hour." The following Saturday, I allowed myself the luxury of sleeping until 6:30. The victory felt not explosive, but deeply settled, a quiet calm that had seeped into the very foundations of my house. I drank my coffee on the porch, watching the sun properly crest the rooftops, painting the world in gold instead of gray. At 7:05 a.m., I finally fired up the Toro. Its gentle hum was the same as always, but now it felt like a reinstated national anthem, a sound of peace earned, not just taken. As I made my first pass, I saw her. Mrs. Gable was on her porch, seated in a wicker chair with a steaming mug of tea. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But the profound scowl was gone, replaced by a neutral, almost contemplative expression as she observed the morning. It wasn't friendship, but it was a cessation of hostilities, and for now that was everything. Later that afternoon, I found a small, folded note in my mailbox. The handwriting was precise, formal, but the message was a white flag. Asterisk, the HOA is discussing a proposal to formally set bin placement times to between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. I believe it's a sensible compromise. I will be voting in favor. A. Gable asterisk. I never rolled my bins early again. And every Saturday, at a very reasonable 7:05 a.m., the peaceful hum of my lawnmower is the only sound that disturbs the dew-kissed calm. We never spoke of it again. Sometimes the greatest victories are not in the destruction of your enemy, but in making them an unwilling architect of your peace. And sometimes, peace simply sounds like a lawnmower, humming at an hour that is acceptable to all.